Berlin. This Coca-Cola factory was inaugurated by then-a-days governing mayor, Willy Brandt, a Norwegian as well. And Willy Brandt inaugurated this in 1959. There were a fantastic film, unbelievably good. The best film about the Cold War ever had been made, 1, 2, 3 by Billy Wilder. You have to see it. If you want to understand what Cold War was, then you have to see this film with the adorable Lieselotte Pulver from 1961. The film had been made before the wall has been built up. After the wall had been built up, it couldn't be shown anywhere in the world because the people were so angry that somebody is joking about the Cold War. And it saved some cinemas in West Berlin in the 1980s to go bankrupt because people ran in it and wanted to see the film. The factory survived from 1959 till 1992. Why? It declined in 1992. The people are still drinking Coca-Cola because the subvention were cut it down to 100%. So Coca-Cola from Berlin was very, very expensive immediately. And so they closed down the factory. Very simple. That was not the only factory which closed down. About 90% of the industrial income of West Berlin was cut down between 1990 and 1998. 90%. The city, which was once the biggest industrial city in Central Europe, is nowadays nearby deindustrialized. The only positive effect you can see, but there you can see also how harsh this process was, is that we have very, very low CO2 emissions, which is quite nice on the one side. On the other side, CO2 emissions in the 1990s had some relevance to economic growth. And there was another big aspect in Berlin which was really a problem, the wall itself. The wall was not a sharp cut through the city, nice and beautiful. It was a vast land, very wide. We are always looking for the wall just only for this nice white strip which was always painted by the East German border troops. No, it wasn't just only this strip. You can see it quite well at this region at Potsdamer Platz. There's some, yes, this here. I think it must be. It doesn't matter. All this region, you see the octagon in the center. All this region, which you see now, is totally overbuilt. That was overbuilt in 1945 as well. That was city. And you have now this big strip which is going through the whole city and destroys the whole fabric of Berlin. It destroys also the fabric of the social politics and the social structure of the city. You can see it quite well if you look for the, oh, thank you very much. If you look for the results of the elections in 1990, 1995, 1999, 2001, and the first time that a party really had the possibility to cross over over the old border, which is here. This is the wall, was in 2006, 17 years after opening the walls. It was a Social Democratic Party which were the first party who had results which are kind of equal in East and West. The Conservatives are still, and there will be at the next elections on Sunday as well, totally concentrated on West Berlin. And the left-wing parties, the so-called socialists, post-communists, however you want to say that, so the old East German governance party, is totally concentrated to East Berlin. So the whole society is destroyed as well. And then we had this small problem which you never have in Scandinavian countries, and that was the reason that I asked before, federalism. Federalism is a wonderful thing. I'm a deep admirer of federalism, and I really think this is one of the best systems for governing a country, to give each region its own relevance. The problem is for federalism if you're the capital, because a capital in a federalist country has not the relevance of other capitals. For instance, if you're looking for this map, and I've showed here, all these red dots are institutions which had been before 1945 in Berlin. So for instance, Siemens and the big industry is going to Munich. The central bank is going to Frankfurt. Some institutions are in Cologne, some institutions in Sachsen-Anhalt, some institutions, the Sea Institute, don't ask me why, the Scientific Sea Institute for Schifffahrt, had been in Berlin before 1945. I have no idea why we don't have a harbor. We have a harbor, but it's not relevant for the sea. Anyhow, so this was one problem of Berlin. The second was that there was an old capital, West German capital, Bonn. And the Bonn people said, hey, we served you 40 years as capital, now you have to do something for us. We are helpless. So there was a new law, which means that the government was separated into parts. Not just only the government, some ministries were separated into parts. So one part is in Bonn, one part is in Berlin. Highly efficient, I say. The last and biggest problem Berlin is suffering is the population crisis. We lost since 1939 20% of our population. This is worldwide unique. There is no other city which was before the war big and shrunk down. Usually big cities tend to expand. Just only Berlin lost 20% of its population, which means about 1.2 million people, which is quite a lot. So this is so the city is at least too big for all the people there. We have much too much space, we have too much apartments. That is the reason that it's so wonderful, cheap in Berlin. We have too much big roads and all this. The whole infrastructure is built for 4.5 million people, and we just only have 3.4 million people. I still think this was the biggest mistake the Berlin government ever did, the Berlin state's government, that they voted against the opening of the border to Poland, to the Baltic states, and to Hungary in 1999, because all the young, talented, and energetic people have gone to Ireland and to Great Britain. And they would have loved to go to Berlin, because most of them are speaking German. German is a very widely speaking language in Eastern Europe. But so they have gone to England or to Ireland and produced there the new wealth and the new income, and not in Berlin. So we still have 3.4 million inhabitants instead of, for instance, 4 million. Would be good. 6 million is maybe a bit too optimistic. The result of these decisions was, and so it is very important to have this in our mind, is that Berlin has, except of Bremen, but Bremen is a specific case because Bremen had wharves and all this, the highest depth of all German states. Not just only in relation to the income of the people, but also in relation to the state size and all this. We have now about 63 billion euro debts. That is an amount of debts which has no problems to compete with Greece. The same is, we have no problems to compete with Spain if you're looking for the unemployment market. We have 13% unemployment in Berlin officially. Unofficially, it's 17 to 18%, because a lot of women are not going anymore to the offices and say, hey, I want to have a job. They simply resigned. And 4% is minimum. They simply said, okay, I'm doing my own job. I'm doing my own thing. So let's say the official data, 13% is horrible enough. 17% is realistic. This is the situation of Berlin. But so wonder, most of you have been in Berlin, and I think most of you wouldn't have seen it. And most of you would have had the imagination this city is rich and wealthy and had a lot of income to build such big buildings. For instance, the Chancellery, the new ministries. And Berlin is indeed rich. In the 1990s, the big solution to solve all the problems of Berlin, the standard solution of the 1990s, give the whole problem to the market and change the industrial city to be a service city. One important part of the service were, of course, the government. The government invested in Berlin about 23 billion euro for the new buildings, for new infrastructure and all this. For instance, these buildings. Then the second part was to give the land and to give the properties and to give the laws, or to change the laws, so that the private market is happy. So we got the Potsdamer Platz area. Very big, built by Mercedes-Benz and by Sony mostly. So two investors for a district which is much bigger than the Oslo inner city. And we had the hope that not just only Potsdamer Platz is rising up, but also the Alexanderplatz. There you see the problem with the whole thing, because Alexanderplatz, you see the scale model there, never raised up. This is still a model. There are some smaller buildings, but that's it. The whole expectations, which thought we have Potsdamer Platz, we have Alexanderplatz, we have some other squares as well, we have of course the Western Center and the Eastern Center, they all collapsed. One way to deal with the problems of Berlin was the idea we have to reconstruct the bourgeois society of the pre-war epoch. It was a highly idealized idea because maybe Berlin never had this kind of society, like for instance München or like Dresden or like Hamburg. But that is highly debated under social historians. But the central idea was to build up a big planning project, the so-called Planwerk Innenstadt, the Planwerk for the master plan for the inner city, and to fulfill all the gaps which had been developed in the time since the Second World War and under the East German and West Berlin planning. So all the yellow projects you see here are planned, ready planned. You see also the Alexanderplatz, which is there. The plan is, you maybe remember the photo here, the plan is incorporated in the fabric of the city, although not one of these buildings had been ever built. The red things are projects which they thought, oh, they should come. These projects, for instance, are just under building. This is ready, this is ready. Most of these projects are ready as well. So the town planners tried to bring the city, the west and the east city, together to build up not just only beautiful houses or a beautiful city, but also to reconstruct a society, kind of society. It was classical social planning of the 1930s, 1940s. And that is the idea here, very good seen in the Friedrichswerder area, which had been built here. These are these blocks. The Friedrichswerder area has been built just only by small houses, 6.50 meters wide. Each house has an own stairway, has an own garage, has an own plot, and each house is just only inhabited by one family. That was the law. And these houses had been sold, the plots have been sold very cheap by the city to bring the people there too, and they're now sold very expensive to other owners. So this is one of the most expensive regions of Berlin, classical social planning. The public sector really had problems in the 1990s. Of course, there were such strange projects like this Tempodrome Cultural Center, which was started to be financed privately, and at least it had been financed 180% by the state, and it was a gigantic bankruption project as well. But okay, this has been built. This, for instance, was a catastrophe. That was a theater, it was the fourth biggest theater in Berlin, the Admiralspalast, and it should turn down to sell the area. And just on its protection, the conservation bureaucracy stopped the whole project, and some stupid journalists, I think, were hated still by some investors. And so this building has been protected, but it was empty for about 15 years. And now it's one of the most active cultural centers of Berlin. The only big cultural project